The morning air bit sharply at his skin, but the physical pain he carried inside was far worse. His muscles ached as if every fiber had been stretched beyond its limits, and each joint protested every movement with a stabbing ache. Days of climbing, slipping, and battling the mountain's relentless elements had taken their toll, and now his body seemed to resist even the simplest commands. Lifting a foot, swinging an arm, even standing upright became monumental tasks. The fatigue was not just physical. It weighed on his mind as well, a constant reminder that his strength had limits, and that the mountain had already tested him close to those boundaries. Every movement sent waves of pain through his legs and back. The muscles he had relied on to propel him forward quivered under the strain, refusing to support the weight of his determination. Even the small act of gripping his ice axe required immense effort, each hand shaking with exhaustion. He could feel every strain, every tiny tear in his muscles, every ache in his joints, as though the mountain itself had reached inside his body to remind him of his fragility. Fatigue was no longer an abstract concept. It had become a tangible, unrelenting presence. Pressing on him with every step and every breath, his energy reserves were depleted. Days without sufficient nourishment and proper rest had left him weak, and each movement required conscious effort, careful calculation, and immense concentration. The simple rhythm of walking had become a mental exercise as much as a physical one. His mind was forced to compensate for the body's failure, coordinating movements with painstaking precision to avoid further injury or collapse. The mountain's relentless demand for strength exposed every vulnerability, making him acutely aware that the body could fail faster than the will to survive could compensate. The cold only intensified the pain, searing through tired muscles and frozen joints. Frostbite crept across exposed skin, while hypothermia threatened to sap the remaining energy he had left. The body, already pushed to its limits, fought a silent battle to maintain warmth and circulation, leaving less energy for movement and survival. Each step forward became a negotiation between what the body could endure and what the mind demanded, and the effort required to reconcile the two was exhausting in itself. Yet, despite the overwhelming physical strain, he continued to move. Even when every instinct screamed to stop, to collapse, or to surrender, he forced one leg in front of the other, one hand to the ice axe, one breath at a time. The mountain had made his body betray him in every possible way, but it had also revealed the depth of human endurance. Extreme exhaustion was no longer just a barrier. It was the crucible in which his resilience was forged. Pain and fatigue defined the limits of the body, but each small act of movement proved that even when the body gives up, the drive to survive can push beyond what seems physically possible, even as his body screamed in protest, refusing to cooperate with his will. Something deep within him refused to surrender. Pain and exhaustion clawed at every muscle, threatening to drag him into despair, but his mind, the inner spark that had carried him this far, remained stubbornly alive. While the body weakened, trembling under fatigue, the mind became a driving force, insisting that he continue, that he fight, that he survive. It was as if an invisible part of him refused to acknowledge the mountain's attempt to crush his spirit, holding tight to a determination that no cold, hunger, or physical agony could extinguish. He became acutely aware of the divide between body and mind. Each step was an act of negotiation, the body protesting, the mind commanding. Muscles quivered, joints throbbed, and energy levels plummeted, yet the mind compensated, urging him to move, to push past the pain, to focus on the smallest achievable goals. It told him that even when the body seemed spent, progress was possible, even if only inch by inch. This internal dialogue between fatigue and willpower was exhausting, yet essential. Without it, surrender would have come easily, and the mountain would have claimed him without resistance. The fire within was not born from ego or bravado. It was instinctive, primal, and necessary. It was the drive to survive, the unwillingness to accept defeat, the deep, unyielding voice that whispered, "You will keep going." Every breath he drew became a testament to that inner strength, each step forward a rebellion against the limitations of his exhausted body. Pain and discomfort were constants, but the mind refused to let them dictate the outcome. Where the body faltered, the mind provided strategy, focus, and endurance. It reminded him to pace himself, to take measured actions, and to conserve energy while still moving forward. This mental refusal to surrender also brought clarity. In the face of physical collapse, he realized that willpower could outweigh immediate pain. He understood that the body could be pushed beyond what it thought possible when the mind insisted on persistence. Even the smallest victory, placing one foot firmly ahead of the other, Gripping the ice axe with control or breathing steadily despite exhaustion became a powerful reinforcement of the mind's dominance over weakness. In that moment, survival became less about physical capacity and more about determination, strategy, and the unrelenting force of human will. By the end of the day, it was clear that the mountain had pushed him to the brink of physical collapse, yet his inner spark remained untouched. His body had failed him in ways it never had before, but the mind had refused to yield. The drive to survive, to endure, to fight through exhaustion had carried him farther than sheer strength could have. It was a lesson carved in the frost and pain. Even when the body gives up, the spirit, the will, and the inner fire can persist, sustaining life and determination against forces that seem insurmountable. The human mind, in its refusal to surrender, became the ultimate weapon against despair and defeat. Hunger, pain, and the merciless cold combined to press him to the edge, each one a constant reminder of the fragility of survival. His muscles burned with exhaustion, his joints ached with every movement. And yet it was the relentless presence of pain and despair that threatened to break him most. Every step forward felt like wading through a storm inside his own body. Every breath demanded effort, every motion demanded focus. Hunger gnawed at him, turning his thoughts inward to the simple act of sustenance he no longer had, making each calorie he had left seem infinitely precious. The mountain had stripped him of his supplies, and now it was stripping him of his comfort, his energy, and the confidence that survival was straightforward. Frostbite began to claim his extremities, a slow and insidious reminder that the cold was never just discomfort, it was danger. Fingers and toes, once tools of mobility and dexterity, now ached and numbed, threatening to fail him entirely. Even the simplest actions, like adjusting his ice axe or gripping a rope, became exercises in precision under duress. Each moment forced him to confront the delicate balance between survival and surrender, where even minor miscalculations could lead to disaster. Pain was omnipresent, a companion that refused to relent, and with it came the ever-present whisper of despair. Mental strain grew alongside physical suffering. The isolation of the mountain amplified every ache and every pang of hunger, twisting them into a gnawing fear that he might not survive. Doubts crept into his mind. Was he moving too slowly? Had he underestimated the mountain's power? Could he continue, or would exhaustion and pain finally claim him? These questions were relentless, echoing in the absence of distraction, and each one carried the weight of consequence. He realized that the true fragility of survival was not just in the physical limits of the human body, but in the mind's susceptibility to fear and doubt when pressed beyond endurance. Despite the overwhelming physical and emotional pressure, he found a way to endure. Each step, no matter how agonizing, was deliberate. He forced himself to ration energy, to breathe methodically, and to focus on immediate, achievable goals rather than the impossible task of conquering the entire mountain at once. He learned to acknowledge the pain without letting it dictate surrender, to accept weakness while refusing to let it define him. Survival became a careful dance between honoring the body's limitations and demanding more from it than it believed possible. By the end of the day, it was clear that hunger, pain, and despair could weaken him, but they could not defeat the part of him that refused to quit. The mountain had pushed him to the brink, demonstrating the fragile balance between life and surrender. He understood that survival was not simply a matter of strength or skill, but a combination of endurance, strategy, and the determination to persist in the face of relentless physical and mental challenges, even when the body screamed for rest and the mind wavered. The spark of resilience inside him refused to extinguish, proving that human spirit could endure what seemed insurmountable in the face of overwhelming exhaustion. He discovered that survival demanded more than brute strength. It required focus, patience, and the ability to break the impossible into manageable steps. Each movement, no matter how small, became an act of careful calculation. Lifting a foot, placing it on uneven ice, adjusting a hand on a frost-coated rock, every motion required conscious thought and deliberate execution. The mountain, with its merciless slopes and hidden dangers, left no room for error. One misstep could mean injury, further exhaustion, or even death. Faced with this reality, he learned to slow down, to measure each action, and to focus only on what was immediately achievable rather than the daunting task of reaching the summit in one motion. The concept of small victories became central to his survival. Instead of thinking in terms of hours or the mountain as a whole, he broke time and effort into individual steps. One breath, one step, one heartbeat at a time became the framework for enduring the physical pain that threatened to overwhelm him. Even the simplest actions, like adjusting his ice axe or taking a sip of water, became symbolic reminders that progress was still possible no matter how slow. These small, deliberate actions were not just practical. They were psychological anchors that kept despair at bay and provided a measure of control in an environment where control was scarce. Mental clarity became as vital as physical endurance. Fatigue had the power to cloud judgment, and one moment of distraction could be catastrophic. He forced himself to stay present, to focus entirely on the task at hand, and to avoid being consumed by the enormity of the climb or the cumulative toll of exhaustion. The mind and body, once working in harmony, now required negotiation, the mind urging forward, the body protesting, and both needing to find balance to survive. In this delicate dance, he realized that perseverance was less about heroism and more about strategy, about knowing how to move efficiently, conserve energy, and avoid unnecessary risks. The mountain had also taught him the value of pacing. Progress, no matter how slow, was still progress. Trying to force speed or act beyond what his body could manage would only accelerate collapse. Instead, he embraced a rhythm dictated by endurance, patience, and precision. Every action was deliberate, every rest purposeful, and every movement a calculated measure to maintain momentum. Through this method, even when the body felt as though it could no longer move, he found ways to inch forward, preserving strength and maintaining hope that survival was still within reach. By the end of the day, he understood that survival was not only about physical capacity but also about mindset. The mountain's challenge was both external and internal, demanding patience, deliberate action, and respect for the limits of the body. Even when exhaustion made every step agonizing, he discovered that by breaking tasks into small, manageable increments, maintaining focus, and respecting the delicate balance between effort and energy, he could continue. The lesson was profound. Persistence in the face of extreme fatigue is rooted not in rushing or forcing the body, but in conscious, deliberate step-by-step endurance, and in the unwavering determination to move forward despite the pain. By the end of that grueling day, it became painfully clear that while the body could be pushed to its limits, the true engine of survival was something far deeper, the human spirit. His muscles screamed, his joints throbbed, and his energy had all but drained. Yet there remained a spark inside him that refused to surrender. This inner fire, forged from determination, hope, and sheer willpower, became the force that propelled him forward, even when every ounce of his physical strength begged for rest or surrender. Pain and fatigue had become constants, but they could not extinguish the relentless drive to survive that burned within him. The mountain had stripped him of comfort, safety, and security, but it could not strip him of that intangible resolve. Each agonizing step he took, each breath drawn with effort, became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Where the body faltered, the mind and soul intervened, compelling him to continue, to endure, to fight. The contrast between his exhausted body and his unyielding determination highlighted a profound truth. Survival is not merely a physical challenge, but a test of inner strength, perseverance, and the refusal to let circumstance dictate the outcome. Even when despair whispered in his ear, tempting him to give in to the mountain's merciless grip, he discovered that small acts of endurance could carry him farther than brute strength ever could. Moving one foot in front of the other, gripping his ice axe with trembling hands, pausing only to catch his breath and regain composure, these tiny victories, though seemingly insignificant, accumulated to create forward momentum. The mountain's harshness had forced him to redefine what it meant to survive. It was no longer about conquering peaks or distances, but about continuing in the face of overwhelming odds. The struggle revealed a deeper understanding of the relationship between body and spirit. The body, exhausted and in pain, could falter and fail, but it was the mind's refusal to yield, the spirit's unrelenting fire, that dictated the outcome. He recognized that true endurance was not simply physical resilience, but the combination of mental fortitude, emotional strength, and the unwavering desire to live. Even when frostbite, hunger, and fatigue made each movement agonizing, the inner will allowed him to take the next step, and the next, and the next, until he could move no further physically, but still remained undefeated in spirit. By the time night fell, he had been pushed to the brink of collapse, yet the spark within refused to die. The day had tested him in ways that were far more profound than the storms, slips, and ice that had challenged him before. It was a reminder that the human spirit has the power to endure far beyond the body's perceived limits, that determination and resilience can overcome despair, and that life itself is sustained not only by strength and skill, but by the inner fire that refuses to be extinguished. Even when the body gives up, that spark can keep a person moving, surviving, and refusing to yield to even the most unforgiving circumstances.